oxygen on the cat. Okay? So, similar to where we started over there, where does respiratory system start? Where do you inhale?
Mouth or
Your oral cavities, or your nasal cavities. Okay? Either one. When you inhale air, it continues through either one and goes into one pathway that is your pharynx. Your pharynx is the point at which those nasal cavities and oral cavities converge into one pathway. Okay. There's another split that determines whether it will go down your trachea or your esophagus. What determines which one of those tubes it's going to go down? Hint. Epiglottis. Okay? If you take a bite of food and you swallow it, everyone know the little dangly thing in the back of your throat? The uvula? The uvula, in association with other nerves, will sense that food is going down your pharynx and it's not air, and it will tell your epiglottis, heads up, we got food coming, close off. So the only place for the food to go, if this is closed, is right over it and down the esophagus. If you're inhaling air, your brain's like, all right, no, it's cool, it's just air, we're not going to swallow or bite a hamburger or something like that. This will stay open, at which point the air can pass into the larynx. So this whole thing is the larynx. It will pass through this hole. Can everyone see this hole right here? Right there. That is the glottis. Epiglottis is above, epi to the glottis. The glottis is the hole. The two flaps that make up either side of the hole are called your true vocal cords. So you have 1 and 2 true vocal cords. Can you see those? These two that I'm sitting in between are the true vocal cords. The hole is the glottis. You have false vocal cords. They are along the outside. Okay, so 1, 2 false vocal cords. 1, 2 true vocal cords. True vocal cords are on the inside. They kind of look like Miss Pac-Man.
What happens when you drink water really fast and we say it goes down the wrong hole?
That would be that you beat your epiglottis to the punch and the liquid went into your trachea. At that point, your brain tells your phrenic nerve to cough, and that's what moves your diaphragm, and that would be the coughing that would happen. You're trying to get whatever happened to go in there out. Okay? So, at this point, we have taken in a breath of air. The epiglottis stayed open. The air passed through the glottis into the trachea. Now, thinking way, 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 way back, what kind of tissue lines the inside of the trachea? Pop quiz. It's the big column. Yes, you're getting closer. Yeah, ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. You remember what the cilia did? Yeah, so the idea is you have cells in your trachea that are going to produce mucus. The cilia are going to beat, they're like little paddles. They're going to beat in a pattern such that the mucus is going to be wicked up out of the trachea, and it's going to catch little pieces of dust and pollen and allergens that happen to make it into the trachea. It's going to clean out that whole respiratory membrane, the idea being you don't want junk in your lungs. If you have stuff blocking the lungs from the blood vessels that are next to them, you're not going to be able to get the air across as fast or as efficiently. Okay, so you have air that is continuing down the trachea. What's special about the trachea? What's holding it open like that? What are these rings made out of? Cartilage? Cartilage, yeah. Think about like your ears and your nose and stuff. They're kind of like springy cartilage. You can't describe cartilage as feeling like cartilage. That's ridiculous. It's rigid. You can feel it if you want. It's little rings that are meant to hold the airway open to where you don't have it collapse on itself, which would be bad because you want to breathe. Okay? So the air continues down and is going to split off. What's the name of the first place that it splits? Primary bronchi. Okay, and we can see that here. If we follow this down, the guy's heart is kind of in the way. Okay, can you see right here? So the trachea continues, and then it splits off into the left and right primary bronchi. The left primary bronchus is going to go to the left lobes of the lung, and the right to the right lobes of the lung. Okay? So within each lobe of the lung, so you have right lobes and left lobes, you can see that the left lobes are really several left lobes, and so are the right lobes. Does everyone see how all of this piece, this piece, this piece, and a little piece underneath are collectively the left lobes of the lung, and then the right lobes also have these pieces?
Is that just for
Oh, no, you're
cats?
fine.
No. Humans have lobes of the lung as well. I don't know for certain that it's the same number or arrangement, but I believe that all mammals have lobes. Okay? So, within the lobes of the lung, the right and the left, you're going to have splits from that primary bronchi into secondary, tertiary, etc., etc. Eventually, you're going to hit the primary or terminal bronchioles. That boundary that separates the terminal bronchiole from the blood supply is called what? Alveolar membrane. Very good. Okay, so at that point, the oxygen is going to cross the alveolar membrane, and it's going to go into the blood. It's going to bind to the hemoglobin. The oxygenated blood from the lungs needs to go to the body. How does it get to the body? What pump? I'm holding it. The heart. All right? The heart is a pump. The right side will send things to the lungs, but the left side is involved in pumping oxygenated blood to the whole body. Okay? So that oxygenated blood is going to come back to the heart from the lungs via the pulmonary veins. It's going to fill the left atria. The left atria is going to drain into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is going to contract. At that point, it is going to leave the heart through the aorta. The aorta splits off into arteries and arterioles and then capillaries. The capillaries are the smallest ones. At that point, you're going to have the oxygen leave the hemoglobin, cross over out of the blood into the cells. The cells are going to use it. Give the CO2 that they have built up from the last time they got oxygen. Dump the CO2 into the blood, and the CO2 is going to bind to the hemoglobin. Okay? So, at that point, you have deoxygenated blood in the body. Where do we need to send that deoxygenated blood to get reoxygenated? The lungs. Yeah, that's where the oxygenation happens. So, to get from the body to the lungs, how do you get there? The pump again. Yeah, the blood via the circulatory system, but yeah, through the heart again. Except this time we're dealing with the right side of the heart, not the left. We'll go over the heart more for the next exam. But, so the blood is full of CO2. It's everywhere in the body. It needs to get back to the heart. Okay? It is going to come back to the heart through veins and venules and eventually into the superior and inferior vena cava. And those are going to dump into the right atria. The right atria is going to fill, drain into the right ventricle. The right ventricle is going to contract and pump that blood, which is deoxygenated, to the lungs. At which point it gets to the lungs, picks up more oxygen, dumps its CO2, and then gets oxygenated. Where does that oxygenated blood need to go? To the body. So it goes back to the heart to get to the body, this time through the left side. The left atria fills, drains to the left ventricle. Left ventricle contracts, goes out through the arteries to the whole body. Then the whole thing happens again and again and again and again. Okay? So, other portions we talked about. You remember the balloon on the model lung? What was that called? Diaphragm. This is your diaphragm. You can see both sides of it here. It separates your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. Okay? Remember we said, well, does anyone remember from the brain exam, karma points if you can pull this one out, what part of the brain is the respiratory rhythm center? Like which part of the brain controls your breathing rhythm? Yes, very, very good. Your pons and your medulla oblongata work together to control your breathing rhythm. So even while you're sleeping, those parts of your brain are making sure you're breathing enough without you thinking about it. They tell your diaphragm whether to expand or to relax or contract and that signal that tells it to do one or the other is sent to the diaphragm through the phrenic nerve. Can everyone see here this kind of stringy piece that attaches to the diaphragm? Within this flap of mesentery, you'll see a little line, and that is your phrenic nerve. This phrenic nerve connects to the diaphragm, and then we'll go all the way back up, and if we followed it all the way through, it would end up within the pons or the medulla oblongata. Okay? That signal from the medulla oblongata is sent through the phrenic nerve, and it tells the diaphragm whether it needs to contract or relax, etc., etc. Okay? When you have spasms of the phrenic nerve in the diaphragm, you get what's called hiccups. That's what hiccups are. It's basically your brain is having a spaz out moment, and it is not accurately telling your diaphragm what to do, and you end up, you can still breathe, but every once in a while you get a off-the-wall spasm. Okay? What else haven't we gone over? Okay. Your visceral and parietal pleura. We talked about this in the abdominal cavity. Those components are also part of the thoracic cavity. So we said that visceral, eviscerate. What happens if you're eviscerated? If you got, no one saw Jurassic Park? No? Yeah, okay. If you get eviscerated, you get cut, and then all your guts fall out. So your viscera come out. Visceral means related to organs. So your visceral pleura is the shiny coating on the organs. The heart doesn't necessarily look very shiny. That's because this bag that the heart is sitting in is called the pericardial sac. If we were to pull this off, which I'm not gonna, you'd see a shiny covering on there. But you can see the shiny coating on things like your kidneys, your liver, the stomach, the intestines. It's not like high gloss or anything. It's just shiny compared to a dead cat. Conversely, your parietal pleura, parietal lobes of the brain are out to the side. Your parietal pleura lines to the side, so the walls of the thoracic and abdominal cavities. You can see that here. Can everyone see how this shiny covering of the abdominal cavity would be the parietal abdominal pleura, or abdominal parietal pleura. Tomato, tomato. So, parietal pleura, visceral pleura. Remember whenever we were showing how the hole in that little lung model would cause a lung to collapse? That hole could either be through your thoracic wall, and hence through the parietal pleura, or it could be through the diaphragm. A hole in either one of those areas would cause this to no longer be a contained pressure system. And no matter what the diaphragm did, you'd just have air moving into and out of said hole. You can't exert pressure on the lungs, therefore they can't inflate or deflate. That's a collapsed lung. Okay. Throw this away afterwards. This is gross. External nares, nasal cavity. The nares is just the outer opening. The nasal cavity, you have a right and left. They're the actual tubes connected to the nares, basically. Pharynx is where the mouth and nose cavities meet. Larynx is your voice box, basically. It's the site at which something decides it's going to go down the esophagus or the trachea, and that depends on whether or not the epiglottis is open or closed. All right. True vocal cords are these little guys in the middle. See these right here? When you speak, you're pumping air from your lungs out. I mean, you can do it the other way, but it sounds kind of funny. The air is passing between the true vocal cords through the glottis. Depending on how tight those true vocal cords are clamped together is going to determine the frequency of sound that results. Has anyone ever played like blowing over like saran wrap or pieces of plastic or something like that? You can make it make a real high-pitched noise and aggravate your teachers and whatnot. I know I'm not the only person that ever did that. Yeah. That's the same principle as to depending on how taut these true vocal cords are will determine the frequency of sound that you make. There's a lot of other components. Your tongue is involved in actually making words and putting them together, but the vocal cords themselves will control the frequency produced. Okay? Primary bronchi, phrenic nerve, diaphragm, visceral, primary.